Their plea was answered, and the most feared species responded. Part 1. The Dying Signal. The galaxy had one rule that nobody wrote down, but everybody followed. Every species knew it. Every civilization taught it to their young. Every trader, soldier, diplomat, and traveler carried it in their bones like a prayer they hoped they would never need. Never contact Earth. Never wake the humans. For 300 years, that rule had kept the peace. 42 civilizations lived under the banner of the Galactic Accord, trading and arguing and building their empires across 1,000,000 stars. They fought small wars. They signed treaties. They broke those treaties and signed new ones. But through all of it, one thing remained constant. The humans stayed quiet in their corner of the galaxy, orbiting their small yellow sun, and the rest of the universe pretended they did not exist. It was safer. Then the Volani started dying. The Volani were a gentle species. They were tall and thin, with skin like pale silver, and wide dark eyes that always looked a little sad. They lived on a beautiful ocean world where the cities floated on the water, and the children learned to swim before they learned to walk. They had no army. They had a small defense fleet that was mostly used for rescue missions during storms. They were poets and musicians and healers. They had never attacked anyone in their entire history as a civilization. The Dreth Dominion did not care about any of that. The Dreth were conquerors. They were large, armored creatures with 4 arms and black eyes that showed no light. They moved from system to system, stripping worlds of their biological resources and leaving behind nothing but dust and silence. They had destroyed 11 civilizations in the last 2 centuries, and the Galactic Accord had done nothing each time except send formal protests that the Dreth used as fuel for their furnaces. When the Dreth fleet arrived above the Volani homeworld, it darkened the sky. 500 warships hung in orbit like a ceiling of black metal. The Volani defense fleet, 43 small ships, crewed by engineers and scientists who had never fired a weapon in anger, rose to meet them. The battle lasted 9 minutes. After that, the Volani had no fleet. They had no orbital defenses. They had nothing between their world and the Dreth guns except the thin blue line of their atmosphere. The bombardment began on a Tuesday. In the deep chambers beneath the ocean floor, where the Volani had retreated with their children and their elderly and their sick, an old ambassador named Poet of Tides sat in front of a communication console that was older than most of the buildings above. The console was cracked. The power was flickering. Around the old Volani, thousands of refugees huddled together in the dark, their silver skin glowing faintly with the bioluminescence that came when their species was afraid. Poet of Tides had spent a lifetime in diplomacy. The old ambassador had begged the Galactic Accord for help, sent messages to every member species, called in every favor, every treaty, every promise that had ever been made. The answers came back one by one, and they all said the same thing in different words. We are sorry. We cannot help. The Dreth are too strong. So Poet of Tides did the one thing that no one in the galaxy was supposed to do. The old ambassador opened every frequency, every channel, every band of communication that the console could reach. And then Poet of Tides aimed the signal toward a small yellow star in the Orion arm and began to speak. The message was simple. It gave coordinates. It gave numbers, how many were dying, how many were left, how long they had before the shelters failed. It described the children. It described the fires. It described what the Dreth did to the worlds they conquered, and what would happen to the Volani if no one came. At the end of the message, because the Volani always ended things with music, a small child sitting near the console began to sing. It was a lullaby, a simple song that Volani parents sang to their children at night, about the ocean and the stars, and how the waves always came back to shore. The child sang it softly, not because she was performing, but because she was scared, and it was the only thing she knew to do. The message went out into the dark. 12,000 light-years away, on a planet called Earth, inside a mountain in a province called Gangwon, a young woman named Yuna was doing what she did every night shift. She was monitoring signals. Most of what came through the deep space antenna array was noise, cosmic radiation, pulsar echoes, the background hum of the universe doing its thing. Yuna had been on duty for 6 hours, and was on her 4th cup of coffee when the console in front of her lit up like a Christmas tree. She put down her coffee. The signal was strong, too strong for natural origin. It was structured, repeating, and aimed directly at Earth. Yuna ran it through the translation software that every monitoring station kept updated, but nobody ever expected to use. When the translation came through, she read it once. She read it again. Then she picked up the phone and called her commanding officer. Within the hour, the signal reached Admiral Taeho. Taeho was 61 years old. He had served in the United Defense Fleet for 38 of those years. He was not a tall man. He was not loud. He had a calm voice, and a habit of folding his hands behind his back when he was thinking. People who did not know him thought he was gentle. People who knew him well understood that his calmness was not the absence of intensity. It was intensity under perfect control. He sat in his office in the Defense Command Center and listened to the message. He heard the coordinates. He heard the death counts. He heard the description of what was happening to a world full of people who had done nothing wrong. Then he heard the child singing. Taeho listened to the lullaby all the way to the end. The room was silent. His aides stood by the door, waiting. The old admiral did not move for a long time. When he finally stood, his face was the same as it always was, calm, steady, unreadable. "Wake the fleet," he said. His aide hesitated. "Sir, the fleet has been dormant for—" "All of it," Taeho said. "Every ship, every crew, every station. Wake them now." The order went out across the planet. In shipyards buried beneath deserts and oceans and mountains, lights began to turn on. Engines that had not fired in decades began to warm. Men and women who had trained their whole lives for a moment they believed would never come received a single message on their devices and stood up from dinner tables, from beds, from their children's bedside, and moved. Across the galaxy, on 100 different worlds, long-range sensors picked up something that made operators freeze. Energy signatures from the Sol system. Not one or two, hundreds, all powering up at the same time. The readings were so large that some systems flagged them as errors. They were not errors. Earth was waking up, and the galaxy remembered why it was afraid. Their plea was answered, and the most feared species responded. Part 2. Why the Galaxy Fears Earth. The emergency session of the Galactic Accord began with shouting, and never really stopped. 42 species, 42 delegations, 42 different body shapes, languages, and ways of expressing panic. Some screamed. Some released chemical signals that made the air in the chamber taste like copper. One delegation simply stood up and left without saying a word, which in their culture was the equivalent of screaming louder than everyone else combined. The Accord Chamber was a massive sphere of white stone floating in neutral space, built centuries ago as a place where civilizations could talk instead of fight. Today, it felt very small. "The Volani have doomed us all," said the delegate from the Morin Collective, a squat, heavily armored species that communicated through vibrations in their chest plates. "They sent the signal to Earth. The humans will come." "Perhaps they will not," said a thin, insectoid delegate from the Tessic swarm. "Perhaps the humans did not hear it. Perhaps they no longer care." "They heard it," said another voice, old and tired. It belonged to the delegate from the Keth, Every head in the chamber turned. The Keth rarely spoke at Accord sessions. When they did, people listened, because the Keth had a reason to know about humans that no other species shared. 300 years ago, the Keth had been an empire. The delegate stood slowly. It was an old creature, bent and gray, with the long limbs and flat face of its kind. It looked around the chamber at the younger species, the ones who had only heard stories, and it began to speak. "You do not understand what you are afraid of," the Keth delegate said. "You think humans are dangerous because they are violent. You are wrong. Many species are violent. The Dreth are violent. Violence is common in this galaxy. What makes humans different is not that they fight. It is how they fight, and what they do after." The chamber went quiet. 300 years ago, the delegate continued, the Keth hegemony ruled 40 star systems. 90 billion souls. We were powerful. We were proud. And we made a mistake. We raided a small human colony on the edge of their space. 6,000 humans lived there. We killed most of them. We thought it was a minor action, a show of strength. The humans would complain to the Accord, perhaps send a protest, and life would continue. The old Keth paused. We were wrong. The humans did not protest. They did not complain. They did not send diplomats or threats or warnings. They sent ships. Not many at first, just enough to take back the colony. We fought them, and we won that first battle. We celebrated. We thought the matter was settled. It had only begun. Within 1 standard year, the Keth hegemony ceased to exist as a political entity. Not because the humans used some terrible weapon. Not because they unleashed a plague or destroyed our worlds. They did something worse. They simply did not stop. The delegate's voice was steady, but its hands were shaking. Their ships came in waves. When we destroyed one wave, another came. When we adapted to their tactics, they changed their tactics faster. They did not fight with anger. That was the most disturbing part. Their communications were calm, professional. They rotated their crews so that fresh soldiers replaced tired ones in an endless cycle. They never needed to rest because they took turns. Their supply lines stretched across light years and never broke. Their factories built new ships faster than we could destroy old ones. They did not try to kill us. They dismantled our military piece by piece. They took our shipyards. They took our supply stations. They disabled our weapons platforms. Every time they captured a Keth ship, they rescued the crew and sent them home. They sent them home. Do you understand? They were at war with us, and they kept sending our people back. In 11 months, the Keth hegemony had no fleet, no military infrastructure, and no ability to project force beyond our own homeworld. The war was over. We had lost everything. And then the humans did something that terrified us more than any weapon ever could. They helped us rebuild. A murmur ran through the chamber. They sent engineers. They sent doctors. They sent food and building materials and teachers. They rebuilt the cities their own ships had damaged. They set up schools. They treated our wounded, not just the civilians, but the soldiers who had fought against them days before. When we asked them why, they said it was because the war was over and there was work to do. The Keth delegates sat down heavily. That is why the galaxy fears humans. Not because they can destroy you, because they can destroy you completely, utterly, without hatred, and then rebuild you with kindness. They can switch between war and peace like changing clothes. No other species in this galaxy can do that. It is unnatural. It is terrifying, and it is why we asked them to leave. The chamber was silent for a long time. 12,000 light-years away, in the hangar bay of the flagship Baekdu, Captain Jisoo stood in front of her squadron and watched them prepare for war. Jisoo was 34 years old. She had sharp eyes and short black hair, and a way of standing very still that made people pay attention. She had graduated at the top of her class at the Naval Academy. She had never seen combat. The last time Earth fought a war in space was before any of them were born. But they had trained for it. Every day, every year, generation after generation of soldiers preparing for a fight they hoped would never come, but knew might. She held up a datapad and read the Volani distress signal to her crew. She read all of it. The coordinates, the death counts, the description of what was happening. When she reached the part about the child's lullaby, her voice did not break, but she paused for a moment longer than necessary. The bridge was quiet when she finished. Ensign Dowan, her helmsman, was 22 years old and looked younger. He had big ears and a nervous habit of tapping his fingers on his console when he was thinking. He had joined the fleet because his grandmother told him stories about the stars. He had never expected to actually fly toward them in a warship. "How fast can we get there?" Dowan asked. There was no fear in his voice, just a question. "Fast," she said. Deep in the engine room of the Bekdu, Chief Engineer Subin was already working. Subin was 40 years old, built like someone who had spent her whole life lifting heavy things, and she had a mind that could hold the entire ship's power grid in her head at once. She was the best engineer in the fleet, and everyone knew it, including her. She was also worried. The faster-than-light drives on the fleet's ships had not been pushed to full power in decades. They were maintained, tested, and kept in perfect condition. But there was a difference between testing an engine and asking it to carry 200 warships across 12,000 light-years at maximum speed. She called Admiral Tejo directly. "Sir, I can give you full power, but I want you to know the drives were not designed to run at this level for this long." "Can they do it?" Tejo asked. "Probably." "Then do it." Subin closed the channel and looked at her engine. She put her hand on the casing, feeling the vibration of the drive core warming up. "Do not break on me," she whispered. "Not today." The fleet assembled in orbit above Earth. 200 warships, destroyers, cruisers, carriers, and the flagship Bekdu at the center. They formed up in a pattern that had been practiced 1,000 times in simulation, but never once in reality. Admiral Tejo stood on the bridge of the Bekdu and looked out at the stars. Behind him, Earth turned slowly, blue and green and white, the only home humanity had ever known. Ahead of him, somewhere in the dark, a child was singing a goodbye song. Jump! 200 ships vanished from Earth's orbit in the same heartbeat. The flash of their departure lit up the night sky bright enough to be seen from the ground. And across the galaxy, every species with sensors pointed at the Sol system watched their screens and felt the same cold understanding settle into their bodies. The humans were coming, and they were not coming slowly. H1. Their plea was answered, and the most feared species responded. H1. Part 3. Arrival. P. The Volani homeworld was burning. From orbit, the planet still looked beautiful in a terrible way. The oceans reflected the light of its twin moons, and the clouds swirled in white patterns across the surface. But between the clouds, where the floating cities had once drifted peacefully on the water, there were now only fires, orange and red dots scattered across the blue like wounds that would not close. P. The Dreth bombardment had been going on for 6 days. They were not in a hurry. The Dreth never were. They had learned long ago that breaking a species slowly was more efficient than destroying them quickly. A slow death gave the survivors time to despair, and despair made them easier to harvest. P. Commander Vrek stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the planet burn, with all 4 arms folded behind his back. The Volani resistance had been even weaker than expected. Their distress signal had gone out days ago, and no one had come. No one ever came. That was the beautiful truth of the galaxy. Everyone talked about peace and unity, but when the fire started, every species looked after itself. His sensor officer interrupted his thoughts. "Commander, we are detecting an energy disturbance at the edge of the system. Vrek did not look away from the burning planet. What kind of disturbance? Faster than light signatures, Commander. Multiple. Very large. How many? The officer was quiet for a moment. Then the officer's voice changed. Approximately 200, Commander. Now Vrek turned. 200 ships. From where? The officer checked the readings, checked them again. Then the officer said a single word, and every dreth on the bridge went still. Earth. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Then, Vrek straightened all 4 arms and forced his voice to stay steady. He had 500 ships. The humans had 200. The numbers were in his favor. Numbers were always what mattered. Battle formation, he ordered. All ships prepare to engage. He told himself the numbers were enough. He almost believed it. The human fleet exited faster than light travel inside the orbital zone of the Villani homeworld. This was not normal. Every spacefaring species knew that you dropped out of faster than light travel at the edge of a star system, far from any gravity wells, where it was safe. Arriving inside orbital range meant threading your ships through a gravity field at speeds that turned small errors into instant death. 200 human ships appeared simultaneously, already in perfect combat formation, as if they had practiced this exact maneuver 1,000 times. They had. Admiral Tejo stood on the bridge of the Bekdu, with his hands folded behind his back. The view screen showed the Villani homeworld ahead, scarred and smoking, and the Dreth fleet above it, like a swarm of dark insects. He took one breath, let it out. Open a channel, he said. All frequencies. His communications officer nodded. Channel open, sir. Tejo spoke clearly and without emotion. Dreth fleet, this is Admiral Tejo of the United Earth Defense Fleet. You have 15 minutes to withdraw from this system. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier. This is not a negotiation. This is a countdown. He paused. The countdown has already started. On the Dreth flagship, Commander Vrek listened to the message and let out a sound that his species used for laughter. It was a deep, grinding noise, like rocks being crushed together. 15 minutes. The human was giving him 15 minutes. He had 500 warships, the largest fleet the Dreth had assembled in a century. All ships, open fire on the human fleet, Vrek ordered. Show them what the Dominion does to fools. The Dreth fleet fired. 500 ships launched their weapons at once. The space between the two fleets filled with light. And then the humans moved. It was not like anything the Dreth had seen before. Human ships did not fly in straight lines. They did not hold formation and trade fire the way every other species fought. They moved in patterns that seemed random at first, but were anything but. Groups of 10 or 15 ships would sweep through the Dreth formation, firing at precise targets, not at hulls or shields, but at specific systems. Drive cores, weapons arrays, communication nodes. They were not trying to destroy the Dreth ships. They were trying to disable them. Captain Jisoo commanded from the bridge of the Baekdu's forward section, leading a squadron of 12 destroyers. Her voice on the comms was calm and steady, giving orders in short, clear sentences that her pilots followed without hesitation. Wing 2, break left. Target the drive core on that cruiser. Wing 3, cover the gap. Dowon, take us under their formation. Ensign Dowon gripped his controls and flew. He was scared. His hands were shaking, and his heart was beating so hard he could feel it in his throat. But his hands moved the way they had been trained to move, and the ship responded the way it had always responded. And fear was just another sensation that he could feel without letting it control him. He dove the ship beneath the Dreth formation, weaving between enemy vessels so close that the hull sensors screamed proximity warnings. Behind him, the rest of the wing followed in perfect formation. They came up on the other side and hit 3 Dreth cruisers from below, targeting their engines with precision strikes that left the ships drifting and powerless, but intact. In the first 30 minutes, Jisu's squadron alone disabled 30 Dreth ships. The Dreth could not understand what was happening. Their weapons were powerful, their ships were strong, but every time they aimed at a human vessel, it was already somewhere else. The humans seemed to know where the Dreth would fire before they fired. They moved like water flowing around stones, never where you expected, always where you did not want them to be. Deep in the engine room of the Bekdu, Subin was performing miracles. The ship had taken hits, power conduits were damaged, 3 secondary systems were offline. But Subin moved through her engine room like a musician playing an instrument, rerouting power, bypassing damaged systems, and squeezing performance out of the ship that its designers had never imagined. "Jisu," she called over the internal comm, "I can give you double forward firepower for 7 seconds. After that, I need 20 seconds to reset, or we lose the port shields entirely." 7 seconds, Jisu said. 7 seconds. Give them to me now. Subin rerouted every spare watt of energy to the forward weapons array. The Bekdu's guns blazed with twice their normal power, and in those 7 seconds, Jisu used every single one. She targeted the 5 largest Dreth ships in her field of fire, and disabled all 5 with shots so precise that the Dreth crews survived, but their weapons did not. Then the power dropped. The shields flickered, and Subin was already moving, hands flying over her console, bringing the systems back online before the enemy could take advantage of the gap. On the other side of the battle, Dohan saw something on his sensors. A small ship, unarmed, rising from the Volani surface. An evacuation shuttle. It was full of civilians, and it was flying straight into the crossfire. A Dreth destroyer turned toward it. Dohan did not think. He pulled his ship out of formation and flew directly into the path between the Dreth destroyer and the shuttle. The destroyer fired. The shot hit Dohan's ship on the port side. Alarms screamed. Something hot and sharp went through the left side of the cockpit, and Dohan felt his left arm go numb, then cold, then nothing at all. He looked down. His left arm was gone below the elbow. The shuttle was still flying. The shuttle was safe. Dohan reached across with his right hand, gripped the flight controls, and kept flying. "Dohan, you are off formation," Jisu's voice said in his ear. "Report." "Took a hit," he said, and his voice was steadier than he expected. "Lost my left arm. The shuttle is clear. I am still flying." There was a brief silence on the comm. Then Jisu said, "Stay in the fight, Ensign. Medical will meet you when it is over." "Yes, Captain." 3 hours after the battle began, it was over. The Dreth fleet was broken. Of their 500 ships, more than 300 were disabled or destroyed. The rest were running, their engines burning at maximum as they fled the system. Commander Vrek's flagship was among the last to go. As his ship limped toward the edge of the system, he looked back at the view screen and saw the human fleet, still in formation, barely damaged, turning away from the fleeing Dreth. They were not chasing him. They were turning toward the planet. Tejo gave the order without hesitation. All available ships, begin emergency relief operations. Medical teams to the surface. Engineering teams to the infrastructure. I want shelters, clean water, and field hospitals within 6 hours. Half the fleet that had just fought a battle pivoted and became a rescue operation. In the shelters beneath the ocean, Poet of Tides felt the shaking stop. The old ambassador had been holding a dying child in thin silver arms, whispering that the pain would end soon, that the ocean would take them home. When the silence came, the poet did not trust it. Silence had come before, and it always ended with more fire. But then a sound came through the shelter walls. Not explosions, not the grinding of Dreth machines. It was voices, strange voices, speaking a language the poet had never heard. And the sounds that came with them were not weapons, they were tools, cutting tools, digging tools. The sounds of people trying to get in, not to kill, but to help. The shelter door opened. Light poured in. Standing in the doorway was a young human woman in a medical uniform. She was small. Her name tag said Hana. She had dark hair tied back, and eyes that were wide and bright and full of something the poet had not seen in days. It was hope. Hana looked at the hundreds of Volani huddled in the dark. She looked at the wounded. She looked at the children. She did not speak their language. She had studied Volani biology from a manual during the flight, reading for hours while the ship shook with the speed of its travel. She was not an expert. She was not ready. She dropped to her knees beside the nearest wounded Volani child and started working. Her hands were shaking. There were tears running down her face. She did not stop. She did not slow down. She worked on that child with everything she had, using techniques she had learned from a datapad 12 hours ago. And when the child's breathing steadied and its silver skin stopped flickering, she moved to the next one. Poet of Tides watched this small human woman cry and work and save lives at the same time. And for the first time in days, the old ambassador believed that the world might survive. Their plea was answered, and the most feared species responded. Part 4. The Galaxy Watches. Every civilization in the galaxy had sensors. Every civilization had intelligence networks, spy satellites, listening posts, and diplomatic channels through which information flowed like water through cracks. Within hours of the battle, every species in the Galactic Accord knew what had happened at the Volani homeworld. 200 human ships had destroyed a Dreth armada of 500. The battle had lasted 3 hours. The humans had not lost a single vessel. But that was not the part that scared them. What scared them was what happened after. On the surface of the Volani homeworld, the human fleet had transformed overnight from a war machine into something else entirely. Transport ships that had carried weapons now carried medical supplies. Soldiers who had fired guns now carried stretchers. Engineers who had maintained warship engines now worked on water purification systems and power generators. They built field hospitals in the ruins of Volani cities. They set up food distribution points along the shorelines where refugees were gathering. They dug through rubble with their bare hands when the machines could not reach deep enough. They worked 20-hour shifts, slept for 4, and then got up and worked again. The galaxy watched all of this through their sensors and their spies, and they did not know what to make of it. The same species that had taken apart a Dreth fleet with terrifying precision was now gently pulling wounded aliens from collapsed buildings and singing to frightened children. It did not make sense. No species in the galaxy could do both of those things. You were either a warrior or a healer. It was not natural. But humans had never been very good at following the rules of what was natural. On the 3rd day after the battle, Poet of Tides finally met Admiral Tejo. The meeting happened on the shore of what had once been the Volani capital. The floating city was gone, sunk during the bombardment, and now the ocean stretched flat and quiet where towers had once risen from the water. A temporary command post had been set up on the beach, a simple tent with chairs and tables and the constant hum of communication equipment. Tejo arrived alone. No guards, no staff, just a gray-haired man in a simple uniform, walking across the sand with his hands folded behind his back. He was shorter than the poet had expected. The Volani were tall, and they had imagined that the commander of such a fearsome fleet would be a giant. Instead, Tejo looked like someone's grandfather. Tired eyes, a quiet face. The kind of person you might pass on the street without a second look. Poet of Tides stood to greet him. The old ambassador towered over the human by nearly a full meter. They looked at each other for a long moment. Two old beings, both carrying the weight of what had happened. "Thank you," the poet said. The words came through a translation device, flat and mechanical, but the emotion behind them was clear. "You saved my people." Taeho nodded once. "How many did we lose?" The question surprised the poet. "Lose? How many Villani died before we arrived? I need to know." The poet was quiet for a moment. "Approximately 2 million. Taeho closed his eyes. When he opened them, there was something in them that the poet recognized. It was grief. Not the official grief of a leader making a speech. Real grief. The kind that sat in your chest like a stone and would not move. "I am sorry we were not faster," Taeho said. The poet did not know how to respond to that. In all the Villani's experience with other species, no one had ever apologized for not saving them quickly enough. Most species apologized for not coming at all, if they bothered to apologize. "Why did you come?" the poet asked. "Because you asked," Taeho said. "But what do you want in return?" Taeho looked genuinely confused by the question. His brow furrowed slightly, and he tilted his head, the way humans did when they were trying to understand something. "In return for what?" "For saving us, for fighting the Dreth, for all of this." The poet gestured at the field hospitals, the supply lines, the hundreds of human soldiers and medics working on the beach. "Every species wants something. What do humans want?" Taeho thought about it for a long time. Then he said, "We want to go home knowing that your children are safe. That is all." The poet stared at him. Then the old ambassador sat down on the sand, very slowly, and covered its face with long silver hands, and wept. Taeho sat down next to the poet. He did not say anything. He just sat there, a small human, on a beach, on an alien world, keeping company with someone who was crying. After a while, he looked out at the ocean and listened to the waves. In the medical bay of the Baekdu, Do-won woke up and immediately looked at his left arm. It was not there. The space below his elbow was bandaged and clean, and a dull ache pulsed where the arm used to be. He stared at it. The reality of what had happened settled over him slowly, like cold water. The door opened, and Subin walked in. She was still wearing her engine room coveralls, stained with grease and coolant, and she looked like she had not slept in 2 days. She sat down in the chair next to his bed and handed him a cup of water. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I have one arm," Do-won said. "For now. We are already printing you a prosthetic. Should be ready in a few days. The medical team says you will have full function." Do-won nodded slowly. Then he asked the question that had been sitting in his mind since he woke up. "The shuttle, the one I covered, did it make it?" Subin looked at him. "It made it. 47 Villani civilians. 16 of them were children." Do-won closed his eyes. He took a breath and let it out. "Okay then. Jisoo recommended you for a commendation," Subin added. "I do not care about that." "I know. But she does, and she wanted you to know." Subin paused. "You did a good thing, Do-won." He opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling. "I was terrified. Everyone was." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Dreth Dominion responded to its defeat in the only way it knew how. It declared war. Not on the Villani. The Villani were no longer the point. The Dreth declared war on Earth itself. The announcement was broadcast on every channel, in every language, to every corner of the galaxy. The Dreth's Supreme Commander promised the total destruction of the human homeworld. He promised revenge. He promised fire. The Galactic Accord held another emergency session. The elder species, the ones who remembered what happened to the Keth, urged the humans to back down, withdraw from Villani space, apologize, give the Dreth a diplomatic victory, and perhaps they would be satisfied with threats. Admiral Taeho was invited to address the Accord. He appeared as a hologram, standing in the center of the great chamber, a small gray figure surrounded by 42 alien delegations. He looked around the room. He did not raise his voice. He did not make threats. He spoke simply, in basic words, the way he always did. We did not come to the Volani homeworld to conquer. We did not come to expand our territory or prove our strength. We came because someone sent a signal into the dark, asking for help, and we heard it. He paused. At the end of that signal, there was a child singing a lullaby. She was singing because she was frightened, and she thought she was going to die. We traveled 12,000 light years because we decided that child should not have to say goodbye. The chamber was silent. If the Dreth Dominion wants war with Earth, then they will have one. We do not start wars, but we have never lost one, and we will not lose this one either. He looked around the room one more time. But I want every species in this accord to understand something. We are not the monsters you told your children about when they could not sleep. We are not the nightmare at the edge of your space. We are the ones who come when the real monsters arrive. And if you cannot see the difference between us and the Dreth, then I feel sorry for you. The hologram ended. The chamber remained silent for a very long time. On the bridge of the Bekdu, Captain Jisoo watched the recording of the speech with her crew. When it ended, she smiled for the first time since the fleet had left Earth. It was a small smile, tired and proud, and her crew saw it and felt something loosen in their chests. "That is our admiral," she said. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. 3 species in the Accord, the Morin Collective, the Tessic Swarm, and the Haline Republic, had all voted to let the Volani die rather than risk angering the Dreth. They had argued loudly and publicly that the Volani were not worth the trouble. They had said the words and meant them. Now, quietly, without announcement or ceremony, supply ships from all 3 species appeared in Volani orbit. They carried food, medicine, building materials, engineering teams. They docked at the human supply stations and unloaded their cargo and left without saying a word. No one took credit. No one made speeches. They had simply watched what the humans did, watched them fight and then heal, watched them bleed and then build, and felt something they had not felt in a very long time. It was shame, not the political kind that came from being caught doing something wrong, the deeper kind, the kind that came from seeing someone else do the right thing and knowing you had chosen not to. One by one, more ships came. The stream of aid to the Volani homeworld grew from a trickle to a river. And far away, in the dark space between stars, the Dreth Dominion gathered its forces and prepared for a war that would change the galaxy forever. Their plea was answered, and the most feared species responded. Part 5. The Feared and the Kind. 6 months passed. The Volani homeworld healed slowly, the way all wounded things heal. Not all at once, but in small pieces, day by day, until the scars remained, but the bleeding had stopped. New structures rose, where old ones had fallen. The oceans, poisoned by Dreth weapons, were being cleaned by a combination of Volani knowledge and human technology. Children played on the beaches again. Not all of them, not the ones who were gone, but enough. And at the border of human-controlled space, the Dreth Dominion gathered the largest fleet the galaxy had ever seen. 4,000 warships. The Dreth had called in every vessel from every corner of their empire. Ships from conquered worlds. Ships from allied warlords who owed debts or feared punishment. Ships that had been in storage for decades, pulled out and armed and crewed by soldiers who had been told that this was the final battle, that humanity would be crushed, that the natural order of the galaxy, where the strong took from the weak and no one interfered, would be restored. The fleet stretched across space like a wall of metal and fire. It was meant to be overwhelming. It was meant to make anyone who saw it understand that resistance was not just foolish, but impossible. Earth responded by sending 12 ships. 12. When the Galactic Accord's observers reported the number, several delegations assumed the data was wrong. The Morin Collective ran the sensor sweep 3 times. The Tessic Swarm sent their own probe to confirm. 12 ships against 4,000. The Dreth Supreme Commander, a massive creature named Borak, who had led the Dominion for 40 years, received the report on his command bridge. He read it again. Then he laughed, a deep grinding sound that shook the deck plates beneath his feet. 12 ships, he said to his officers. The humans have gone mad. They have lost their minds. Perhaps their little victory over Vrek made them believe they were gods. He stood to his full height, merely 3 meters of armored muscle and fury. Destroy them. All of them. Leave nothing. The Dreth fleet advanced. The 12 human ships did not retreat. They held their position in a loose formation, hanging in space like stones in a river. They were large, much larger than the warships that had fought at the Volani homeworld. They were carriers, long, heavy vessels, with hulls that were more door than wall, covered in panels that had not yet opened. Admiral Tejo stood on the bridge of the Bekdu, which flew at the center of the 12. Beside him, Captain Jisoo watched the sensor display as 4,000 red dots moved toward them. Subin was in the engine room, running final checks on systems that had never been activated outside of testing. Dohwan, his new prosthetic arm gleaming silver under the bridge lights, sat at the helm, his fingers resting lightly on the controls. "Admiral," Jisoo said quietly, "they are in range." Tejo nodded. He opened a broadband channel. One last message. "Dreth Fleet, this is Admiral Tejo. We built what you are about to see after the Keth War. We built it because we knew that someday someone would try what you are trying now. We built it and we hoped, with everything we had, that we would never need to use it." He paused. "You have 5 minutes to withdraw. After that, I cannot help you." Borak heard the message and did not bother to respond. 5 minutes, the humans and their countdowns. He gave the order to fire. The first Dreth volley crossed the space between the fleets in seconds. Thousands of weapons firing at once, a wall of energy and metal aimed at 12 targets. The panels on the 12 carriers opened. What came out of them was not like anything the galaxy had seen. Small craft, thousands of them from each carrier. They poured out of the launch bays like water from a broken dam, filling the space around the human ships in a cloud so dense that it blocked out the stars behind them. Each craft was small, fast, unmanned, and controlled by human tactical networks, artificial intelligence systems that could think and react in microseconds, coordinated by human officers who guided the swarm strategy from the carriers. 12 carriers, thousands of strike craft each. The math was simple. In seconds, the space around the Dreth fleet was filled with more targets than their weapons could track. Borak stared at the sensor display. Where there had been 12 dots, there were now tens of thousands. They moved in patterns that his tactical officers could not predict, flowing around the Dreth fleet like a living thing. They did not attack immediately. They surrounded. They waited. Tejo's countdown reached 0. The swarm struck. It was not a battle. It was a demonstration. The unmanned craft targeted the same systems that human ships had targeted at the Volani homeworld. Drives, weapons, communications. But where human pilots had done it one ship at a time, the swarm did it to hundreds of ships simultaneously. Dreth warships went dark in waves, their engines killed, their weapons silenced, their hulls intact but powerless. The swarm flowed through the Dreth formation like wind through dead leaves, and everything it touched stopped moving. In 12 minutes, half the Dreth fleet was disabled. Borak watched his empire's greatest achievement die around him, and felt something he had never felt before. He had conquered worlds. He had destroyed civilizations. He had burned cities and harvested populations and slept soundly afterward. Fear was something other species felt. It was not meant for him. He felt it now. On the bridge of the Baekdu, Jisoo monitored the swarm's progress with steady eyes. The tactical display showed the Dreth fleet collapsing inward as ships tried to retreat, but found the swarm already behind them. It was controlled, precise. The swarm was not killing crews. It was removing the ability to fight, nothing more. "Do-won," Jisoo said. "How is the helm?" Do-won flexed his prosthetic hand on the controls. "Steady, Captain. Keep it that way." In the engine room, Subin watched the power readings from the swarm control systems and allowed herself a small, fierce smile. The systems were holding. The carriers were stable. Everything was working exactly as designed. She had spent 2 years helping build these systems. Late nights, missed holidays. Arguments with engineers who said it could not be done. She had done it anyway, because she believed that the best weapon was one so overwhelming that it never had to be used. Today, it had to be used. But it was working, and no one was dying. Borak gave the order to retreat. It was the first time in his 40-year command that he had spoken those words. His voice broke as he said them. The surviving Dreth ships turned and ran, their engines straining, and the human swarm parted to let them go. The war declaration was rescinded within the hour. The Dreth Dominion sent a formal message to Earth, stating that hostilities were ended. It was not an apology. The Dreth did not apologize, but it was a surrender in everything but name, and every species in the galaxy knew it. The galaxy exhaled. In the weeks and months that followed, things changed. Hana never went back to Earth. She stayed on the Volani homeworld and opened a medical clinic on the coast where the old capital had stood. She learned the Volani language slowly, word by word, making mistakes that made the children laugh, and trying again until she got it right. She taught Volani children human songs, simple ones, about rivers and mountains and home. They taught her theirs, about the ocean and the stars, and the waves that always came back to shore. She was not the best doctor on the planet. She was not the smartest or the most experienced. But she was there, every day, and that mattered more than skill. When someone asked her why she stayed, she said she had found where she was supposed to be. Dohan was promoted to lieutenant and assigned as a military liaison to the Volani Defense Force, the first joint human-alien military posting in 300 years. He was nervous on his first day. His prosthetic arm was visible beneath his uniform sleeve, silver and mechanical, and he worried that the Volani would see it and think of the war. Instead, the Volani gave him a name in their language. It translated roughly to, "the one who stood between." They said it with respect. He wore it with honor. Subin returned to Earth and started a new project. Not warships, not weapons, rapid response rescue vessels, ships designed to reach any point in the galaxy within hours, carrying medical teams, engineers, and supplies. She named the project Songbird, after the lullaby in the original Volani distress signal. When the first prototype launched, she stood on the observation deck and watched it climb into the sky, and thought about all the signals out there in the dark that had gone unanswered. Not anymore. Jisoo was offered a promotion to admiral. She turned it down. "I belong on a bridge," she told Taeho, "not behind a desk." He had been the same way once. Taeho retired. He had served for nearly 4 decades, and his body was tired, and his hair was white, and he had earned the right to rest. He moved to a small coastal village in Busan, where the houses were old, and the streets were narrow, and the ocean was always nearby. He spent his mornings walking on the beach. He spent his afternoons reading. He spent his evenings sitting on his porch, listening to the waves. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet and the stars were out, he would sit in his study and play the recording, the original Volani signal. He would listen to the coordinates and the death counts and the desperate words of an old ambassador begging the universe for help. And then he would listen to the child's lullaby, the small voice singing about the ocean and the stars, and he would close his eyes and remember why they went. Not for glory, not for power, not because they were the strongest species in the galaxy, because someone was afraid, and they knew how to help. In the great chamber of the Galactic Accord, Poet of Tides stood before 42 delegations for the last time. The old ambassador was frail now, leaning on a staff carved from Volani coral, but the voice was still clear. "We sent our cry into the void," the poet said. "We expected silence. That is what the void gives. That is what it has always given. But our cry was heard." The most feared species in the galaxy heard a child singing a goodbye song, and they crossed 12,000 light-years of darkness to make sure she could sing again. The chamber was still. For 300 years, you feared the humans. You kept them at a distance. You told your children that they were dangerous, that they were unpredictable, that they were not like us. And you were right. They are not like us. They are better. Not because they are stronger, but because they are strong and they choose to be kind. That is the rarest thing in this galaxy. That is the thing we should have seen all along. The poet paused. Perhaps it is time we stopped being afraid of the ones who answer when we call. The Accord voted. For the first time in 300 years, humanity was invited back into galactic civilization. The vote was unanimous. Not because the species had stopped being afraid, but because they had finally understood that fear and gratitude could exist in the same heart, and that the second one mattered more. The invitation was sent to Earth on a quiet afternoon. It arrived at the Defense Command Center, was processed through channels, and eventually found its way to a retired admiral in a small coastal village in Busan. Taeho read it, sitting on his porch, with the sound of the ocean in his ears and the warmth of the sun on his face. He read it once, he read it again. Then he set it down and smiled. Not because humanity had been accepted, but because the invitation came not out of fear, but out of something far stronger. And somewhere, on a healed world orbiting a distant star, a child who had once sung a goodbye song looked up at the night sky and sang a different song, a new one. One she had learned from a human woman with kind eyes and gentle hands. It was a song about the waves that always came back to shore.